This is the latest Q&A, a brand new channel update. Also going to touch on Elite Dangerous in August. What are Frontier's plans for that month? At least as best as we can guess. We do know a big update is coming for that month, update 13, and it's going to be a narrative update, very likely surrounding the ongoing saga between Azimuth and the Thargoids. Before we get to that though, we've got a bunch of other things to discuss. So as long-term viewers of this channel would be well aware, these videos are supported by Patreon supporters as well as YouTube members. So essentially, these really are videos for supporters. It's an ongoing discussion between supporters where they can drop questions in, topics, suggestions, and pretty much anything else. So very nice opportunity there. Of course, everyone gets to watch these, but supporters particularly get to get directly involved. Now, if you ever do have a desire to get involved with this, then do check out the links in the video description below where you can join up with a Patreon or a YouTube member. And of course, a massive thank you to all supporters of this channel. Without your support, the channel wouldn't exist in its current form. So yes, it really does mean a huge amount. And thank you for that as always. Let's get on with the topics at hand then. The first questions here, the three in fact, come from Mike. This is the first question. New game titles such as Starfield are showing potentially truly amazing graphics for planetary surfaces. Now that Frontier have decided not to pursue further Elite Dangerous development on consoles due to performance issues, does this free up the developers to introduce more landable planetary types, or could it be that current PC hardware is already being pushed a little too hard by Frontier's rendering technology? So this is a really good subject, very interesting subject. A lot of different points were made in there. So let's start with the obvious thing, the console development. Frontier never really said why they were ceasing development on consoles. Now, we all assume it is performance related. Personally, I do agree. I do think it was performance related, but Frontier never actually addressed that. They never said why they were stopping development on consoles. And of course, the lack of further development on consoles was very bad news, a huge blow to the community, and leaving a lot of people in the lurch. Not really the ideal way to go forward with the game, but it is the way it is. That was Frontier decide. Unfortunately, that's what we're stuck with. This goes on to your point of, will it be beneficial to PC users as a whole? Will it basically allow Frontier to further improve Elite Dangerous? Well, that's the thing. I'm not entirely sure. If you'd asked me about 2-3 years ago, I would have said yes, definitely. But with the way things are now, it seems, well, a little less certain to me. Personally, my take on this is Frontier not committing hugely or massively to Elite Dangerous' rather future development. This is just my own personal opinion, but it is an opinion based on Frontier's roadmap for Elite. As I said many times before, this is really good information. It's great that Frontier actually did reveal their future plans for Elite. But as you can see, it's relatively slim pickings here. Update 13 says some narrative content. We're going to talk about that further into the video. And then we've got some stability and optimization updates. Of course, stability and optimization updates are something that should really be coming fairly regularly with any online live service game. These are a standard feature and not really something that you would generally include on a roadmap, at least not something I've seen any other games company include on their roadmap as a feature. Essentially, for August then, that just leaves us with narrative content. In November, we have a major narrative phase. So again, this one is perhaps the biggest update. And then in early 2023, we've got a key feature overhaul. So yes, this does show to me that Frontier committed to the future of Elite Dangerous and further development of the game, but I don't think they've got any large-scale plans, at least not for the next year to maybe 2 years. Beyond that, we really are in the territory of complete wild speculation. So not speculation with evidence, but speculation that is just really being plucked right out of the air. So with that in mind, it's very hard to guess whether or not Frontier will introduce any more landable types of planets. Now, one thing we do know is that PC hardware is more than capable of going way beyond what we're seeing currently in Elite Dangerous. We see this with Microsoft Flight Simulator, we see it with Star Citizen, and we see it with many of the Unreal Engine 5 tech demonstrations. So if there are any limitations here, I don't think they're hardware related, but probably, as Mike points out here, related to Frontier's rendering technology. So the bottom line here, my takeaway point is that, well, it's really hard to guess where Frontier are going with Elite Dangerous beyond their early 2023 roadmap. For now though then, all we can really do is sit back and wait. Let's see where Frontier go with this. Next up, we got a few different topics from Kian. Do you recommend any mods for Microsoft Flight Simulator? So yeah, there's quite a few there actually, but I'll stick to just a few for this particular video. One, and perhaps my current most favourite, is the mod by Jay Shrike. This brings moving aircraft carriers directly into Microsoft Flight Simulator using the aircraft carriers that were introduced into the recent Maverick DLC. Of course, in the sim, those aren't available for free roam. You can't actually land on them or outside of the Maverick challenge, unfortunately. But thanks to Jay Shrike, the mod actually allows you to use those aircraft carriers in various locations around the world. So I'll link that in the video description. I also briefly showed it in a recent video. So yes, a very nice mod there. Now, if you're into experimentation and you don't mind taking a couple of risks with your Microsoft Flight Simulator installation, then the Google Maps mod is well worth a look at. This replaces the Bing Map data, the Bing Map world data, with Google Maps world data. You know, it's not great in all cases. In some cases it's actually noticeably worse, but in other cases it's much better. Again, this is something I looked at in a relatively recent video, so I'll link that in the video description below. But again, do keep in mind that this one can be a little bit tricky to install. And then of course there's also the helicopter mods, a few free ones out there. These are also pretty neat as well, and quite a lot of work has clearly been put into these. But do keep in mind that Microsoft are adding helicopters officially into Flight Simulator in November. Okay, so another point from Kian here. Do you think that your Elite Dangerous Epic History series will ever return? Well, the Epic History series, this was all about the lore for Elite Dangerous, the background all the way back to, well, our current day in fact, between today and all the way up to more or less 3308 in Elite Dangerous. So really, the Epic History series really did cover pretty much all the lore in Elite Dangerous. That said, there is the Azimuth Saga, which is pretty recent. I haven't covered that yet, but it feels a little bit too recent to actually include in the Epic History series. So for now, this is definitely on hold and will be on hold until Frontier release, well, something significant and something brand new that will be suitable for starting up that series again. Although, that said, I do fully realise a lot of people really did like that series, so yeah, something I do want to return to, but only when there's suitable material. Right, now, what do you suggest as a starter ship in the Star Citizen? And do you think a potential series could happen for ship review? So, right up front, I definitely won't be doing a ship review series. That's not my scene at all, not really the type of thing I like to do or really enjoy doing. I haven't done it for Elite Dangerous either. But talking of starter ships, well, the ship that most people seem to recommend is the Cutlass Black. It's also a ship I'm considering picking up myself, to be perfectly honest there. I do currently have a Origin, a 300i, so not the best of ships. It does the job for what I want it for, but the Cutlass Black seems like it could be a good option. But that of course really does come down to whether you even feel you should be buying ships to start with. A lot of people will tell you it's not necessary, don't do it, just stick with the starter pack and see how the future development of the game goes. But that said, if you are invested in the game in the sense of wanting to actually participate in it and wanting to be involved in it, then a lot of people are happy with the Cutlass Black. What ship describes you? So, we're talking sci-fi ships here, or are we talking ships from Star Citizen? If we're talking about sci-fi ships, yeah, you got me there. Well, I've always liked utilitarian style ships. You know, they've got the rough and ready type look, so that would definitely be the Millennium Falcon for that, but that seems a bit of an obvious choice. If we're talking larger ships, then it would definitely be the Battlestar Galactica, and that would be the original, rather than the 2003 reboot. Really like the 2000 reboot actually. Talking of that, one of my favourite ever sci-fi shows, but nothing beats the original Battlestar Galactica ship. Absolute classic there. Returning back to Mike, there's still many regions of space in Elite Dangerous, including some way out in the black that are permit locked. Could it be that Frontier's narrative plan for these regions was a long-term view? Or might it be a case that we'll see the narrative for these regions either come very late or perhaps even not at all? Now, these are definitely locked, some of them at least, for narrative reasons as well as future content. That was explained by Michael Brooks many years ago, back in 2015 I do believe. So back then, Michael Brooks was the executive producer for Elite Dangerous, and he was heavily involved in narrative and story. Created, I do believe, a whole lot of the Thargoid-based content, the Thargoid-based story and lore, that wouldn't be revealed for a few years after that particular point. He later departed the Elite Dangerous development team and moved on to other projects, so yet I think his presence there is sorely missed. At any rate, he clearly pointed out at that time that yes, these areas are permit locked for both narrative reasons as well as future content, but yet we need to keep in mind that this was said around about 6 years ago at this point, so obviously things have changed. I do believe that Frontier will eventually unlock some of these permit locked regions, and that may happen as a part of either the August update or the November update. But that said, there are a lot of permit-locked regions out there, so it's very unlikely at this point that they would all get unlocked. There's a lot of them after all. Moving on to Robin. Any thoughts on how Microsoft decided the world update regions? Presume it's marketing driven, or perhaps access to data. Seems odd that parts of the world have been revisited a couple of times, and other areas not at all. Now this is a really interesting point. It's something I do wonder about myself. But it's also a point that has been addressed by Jörg Newman, the head of Microsoft Flight Simulator. Apparently, it's very much related to the amount of data that is available for any particular region. So when there's a lot of data for a region, it does take a lot of time to collect this all together. Microsoft are very fortunate that they do have direct access to Bing Maps, so a service not too dissimilar to Google Maps, and there's not really that many services out there in the entire world that are like this. Perhaps on this particular scale, Microsoft and Google are really the only candidates out there, so for Flight Simulator it's very good to have access to that type of data, but I think it does seem to have an effect and does determine the direction they take with world updates. It also explains why they return to certain areas again, as they did with the recent world update and the USA. They recently got access to new data that they didn't have on the original USA world update. I think that was world update 2. So once they got access to this data, Jörg Newman explained that they felt it reasonable and necessary to return to the USA again for a larger scale update. We do know that in the future they plan on updating London again, so it seems likely that one of the future updates is also going to return once again to the UK. So it's my impression that the data is definitely what drives Microsoft's decision for world updates, but marketing obviously then kicks in afterwards and really does hammer those points home. It's also likely one of the reasons we don't get many world updates for certain areas. The Southern Hemisphere, for example, doesn't have much in the way of world updates, particularly Brazil and South America, but also much of the African continent as well. I'm not sure how much data is available for those sort of locations, possibly far less data than is available for the Northern Hemisphere. If so, that would very likely explain the lack of world updates for Brazil and every other area in the Southern Hemisphere, with the exclusion, of course, of Australia, which has already had a world update. So yeah, I guess for now, we'll just have to see which direction Microsoft head in with this. We do know they do plan on doing some Southern Hemisphere updates. I hope that is sooner rather than later. Okay, so the final question comes from Mike. Do you know if there are any plans to add historical landscapes to Microsoft Flight Simulator? It would be fascinating to fly over historical vistas and see the world as it used to be. So I think this is a really, really nice idea, and perhaps goes in a little bit hand in hand with the idea of historical weather. So historical weather is something I do know Microsoft have considered. That's the idea of returning to weather in the past, so well-known storms from the past and other such weather. Something Microsoft are considering, but I do believe this is more of a data issue than anything else. And again, it will definitely be a data issue to do that with historical landscapes as well. Now Google have done this themselves. There is a bit of a timeline that you can go back in Google Maps on and have a look at locations as they once used to be. It's not something that I've seen Bing do with Bing Maps, but obviously they must have some level of historical data because they do update Bing Maps and the previous data just disappears off the internet. But it must still exist. Microsoft must still have access to that. So yeah, having the ability to do a bit of time traveling in Microsoft Flight Simulator, at least for certain cities anyway, would be very, very nice. I don't believe they've got any plans for that, but definitely something that I'd like to see suggested to them, and maybe something for the future. I guess we'll have to see on that one. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the various topics and questions here, so thank you very much for dropping those in. always a pleasure to discuss these. There is one other topic I do briefly want to touch on, and that is Frontier's plans for Elite Dangerous going into August. Now, this section of the video is pure speculation, we don't really know what's going on there, but I'd like to point out that some people would feel that the Azimuth saga and the whole thing that's currently going on in the star system HIP 22460 is being somewhat dragged out, and I think there's a very specific reason for that. It's happening this way because it requires a narrative update, a content update, a physical drop of code for Elite Dangerous, and that's going to arrive in update 13, which is due in August. We can see that right here on the roadmap. So I feel this is really interesting because it suggests that Frontier are going to introduce new content. What sort of scale this arrives on is a complete mystery, of course, but whatever the scale, it is requiring, or at least it does seem to be requiring, a patch update, so a client-sized and possibly server-side update to enable this for all users. So yes, update 13 is a narrative update, and there's a very obvious narrative script going on right now. Now, what will that content actually be? Well, difficult to speculate, isn't it? But if I were to speculate, I'd very likely suggest it's going to be some type of new Thargoids, possibly Thargoid motherships, otherwise known previously due to leaks as Thargoid Titans. I also think there's room for Thargoid on foot combat, but I suspect that will probably come later on in the year, around about November, with the second narrative update. Of course, could be completely wrong on this, but as I say, speculation, and speculating that update 13 will be a space-based update with new Thargoid spaceships of some type, and update 14, the November update, will be on foot combat, but yeah, we'd really have to see. But just wanted to throw that out there. Do let me know what your thoughts and feelings on that are. Do you think, what do you think update 13 is going to be? We know it's going to be a narrative update. What specifically do you think it's going to contain? And do you think it's going to be connected to the Azimuth saga? Love to hear from you. Do let me know in the comments section below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.